welcome guys. Maybe we'll quickly go around, just really quickly, introduce yourself, introduce your company, and then we'll dive right in.
Perfect. So my name is Paulo 300. I'm one of the co-founders of Aptoide. Álvaro Pinto, the other co-founder, is also here today. We are an open platform for Android app stores. We are based here in Portugal. We have around 60 people working in our team.
My name is Mark. I'm partner of Gobi Partners. We're actually a VC fund, invest across China, Southeast Asia. We manage about $500 million of investments. Aptoide is actually our first investment in Europe as well as in Portugal.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Jonathan Becker. I'm with eVentures. We are a very global venture fund where we invest in the US, in Europe, out of Berlin, but also in China, Brazil, and Japan. And we have a focus on Series A companies, ideally with very global ambitions. And just announced the fifth fund for Europe at 150 million.
Fernando Ferreira from Portugal Ventures. We are a state and private bank venture capital outfit with circa 400 million euros under management. We focus on seed stage investments. And Aptoide was our first investment in this new investment strategy.
Great. So, as you all have guessed by now, these four gentlemen, they were all part of this funding round that you guys announced beginning of this year in January. It was a 4 million Series A. And I think the interesting thing is, and this is why this is a case that's relevant, it's around with, led by a fund from the US, Germany. I guess you're a US fund, right, officially?
No, I mean, it's dedicated funds in Europe. We are a European fund based in Germany.
And with investors from China and also, of course, from Portugal. And there was a couple of aspects here that were quite unique. So I think it's worth maybe, Paulo, quickly sharing a couple of war stories with us and just explaining a little bit, laying out how this story came about and how you ended up with this illustrious round of investors that we have on stage here.
Right. So the Series A started when we broke even, so when we reached the break even. So when a startup don't have money, the current investors press you to raise money. But when you are cash flow positive, they even press you more to raise money because it makes sense to leverage your business, what you have. So we start to look into investors for a Series A, and we started by going to the same places that everybody goes, London, Paris or San Francisco. But then we understood that for our profile, should be much more interesting to have a global VC like eVentures and then VCs from the emergent markets where we are investing. And that would be Southeast Asia, that would be China for the partners. And that's where we start to go to Singapore and we start to go to Shanghai and to talk with investors. So, and the first step was Tiago, which is my colleague and friend that was helping us in the raising money. He went to live in Singapore, and we start to make connections with investors. So we learned in the process that raising money is, of course, time-consuming, and we need to be very organized. So we have put a CRM to manage. And thinking out of the box was the lesson that we learned, and to look for investors where sometimes it's not supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. So you're Aptoide, just to take a small step back, it's an independent app store, and you already had a very strong footprint in Asia. So in how far would you say that this is a special case, or this is more of a, or that is something that you would actually suggest to other companies from Portugal and from Europe?
I would strongly suggest to go after a profile that matches. So a global VC, European VC makes a lot of sense, but also to complement or even to have the lead investment from some part of the world that you think that could bring you some value from the knowledge, from the network, and so on. So I don't think we are one of the cases. I know that there are startups, tourism-based. There is a lot of tourism coming from Asia. There are startups in fintech. Singapore, Hong Kong are centers for fintech. So I think there are today a lot of use cases of Portuguese startups that could really benefit from having investors that are not from Europe or not from US.
Mm. So Fernando, you being sort of the first money in, was this something that that surprised you? Was this something that you actively thought of as a strategy, or did you sort of stumble on the right path there? Are you now trying to replicate this model with other companies in your portfolio, or tell us a little bit about your perspective?
Well, from the start, Aptoid was a special case for us. We're talking about a B2C company with a very broad range of customers. Today they have like 100 million active users. So from the start we had the conviction that it would be a special case. We also saw that they were already had a pretty strong base in the US and Europe, and so it would make perfect sense, and the first signs were there, that they would grow in less developed geographies like Latin America and Asia. So I think in the end it was a very good fit to be able to assemble investors that can leverage all these geographies together and help them go further.
Mark, also this being your first investment in
Sure.
in Portugal, I understand, or in Europe in general.
Sure.
How did that change your perspective? First of all, how did you guys? I mean, I understand you ran a pretty tight process, Paulo, with really systematically trying to approach the right investors with the right profile. So how did you guys? How was that match? How did that initially come about?
Yeah, so in our case, generally we invest in Asian startups across China and Southeast Asia. So for Aptoid case, it was a special case. I think one day, Tiago sort of showed up in our door and said, "Hey, we're Portuguese startup expanding to Asia." I think that's very critical. They have actually taken a very important first step. They decided to break the chicken and egg situation by actually moving to set up office in Southeast Asia. So I think that actually makes a lot of difference for us. So having invested in Aptoid, I think what we have found is a lot of European startups, the situation is actually much more similar to Southeast Asian startups in the sense that our markets are more fragmented. So it makes a lot of sense for Portuguese startups to expand from day one outside Portugal into Europe as well as into the global market. So similar thing is happening in Southeast Asia. The market obviously is the user base for mobile users actually in Asia. So we do see that a lot of startups in Southeast Asia is the same thing. They start from a simple home market, but immediately they're trying to scale to India and markets like Indonesia. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a good match.
So when you say Southeast Asia, just to understand, then you have to excuse us here. When you say Southeast Asia, it's you're differentiating it from mainland China. So you're saying mainland China and then Southeast Asia, sort of rest of Asia, if you want.
Yeah, that's right. So I think China is a market that's much more similar to the US, huge continental size of domestic market. Southeast Asia is like Europe, so you have 600 million people, but spread across about 15 countries. Mm-hmm. So the situation is very similar to Europe. Okay. Multiple languages, multiple cultures.
So when a European company is sort of, they're naturally, like you said, they're already set up a little better to go global from day one, especially if they come from small European countries. So is your a suggestion that they should rather try and replicate that process in Southeast Asia in that fairly fragmented market, or should they go for the big price?
So it depends. I think if you look at some of the European startups that are very successful, I can choose a German example. Rocket Internet is very successful. They set up this e-commerce venture in Southeast Asia called Lazada. It was recently bought by Alibaba for $1 billion. So sometimes I do think focusing on the fragmented markets in Europe and Southeast Asia makes a lot of sense for the European startups.
So Jonathan, you guys led this round. Was this sort of part of a strategic master plan that you almost made this, that you were actively looking for an Asian co-investor, or how did this come about?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say that we had this giant master plan of looking for Android marketplaces, and then we looked for years, and we found out it was actually, it was a lot more random. So I was here last year at the investment summit, and I had lunch, and on the opposite side of the table there was Tiago, one of the employees of Aptoid, sitting there, and we just casually connected. And then he mentioned Aptoid and some of the numbers. And I think what was amazing to me is that I think at that time, Aptoid had well over the population of Portugal as users a year, and it was this really small company, kind of like already leading in the space of third-party Android marketplaces and having a user base all over the place. And so, we took it from there, and we met several times in Lisbon. And I think in generally, it fit very well our kind of like perspective of being in many different markets in the US, in Europe, and having an open eye for companies that are actually utilizing local strengths, but having a very global target audience. I think Aptoid was never focusing on on the Portuguese market itself, but it was always going after a global market, but at the same time utilizing the great engineering talent in Portugal. So I guess that was very, very appealing to us, and so we led the round, and we're happily joined by the Asian co-investors.
Paulo, would you say that there was a lot of additional overhead involved? Did this cost more strength, more travel, more time, or would you say that in the end it came together quite smoothly?
Was a surprise, quite smoothly, because people says, okay, there is sometimes a cultural collision between Europe and Asia, or Asia US, or Europe US, and in the end, we all can get in the same page very quickly and very fast. Of course, today we had our board meeting at 7 a.m., tried to match with the US board member and the board member in Asia, but that's part of the business and it has to be done. But it's a surprise. Working with global VC like eVentures, with Portugal Ventures, and with GoBVC and Golden Gate Venture from Singapore, in the end, culturally, we don't feel any kind of clash, any kind of problems. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if we are aligned in the goal, in the purpose, and the vision for the business, we all speak the same language, which is startups and entrepreneurship.
Well, of course, how long did it take to put the round together?
It took around 9 months to 12, and then it took until signing the deal like 4 to 6 months, a little bit more time than we expected. So if you are expecting to close a Series A, take 3 to 6 months in the worst case, which is our case, 3 to 6 months to sign the deal after everything is
sure
agreed.
So I mean, compared to sort of these comfy usual suspect rounds in Europe, there is an additional effort involved for sure. Would you say that because you now have a mock on board, that was there any specific challenges that you could address more efficient and faster with them on board, beyond the usual help and contacts and opening the address book, which of course is already worth a lot for you if you operate in these geographies, but was there any specific challenges that helped you overcome, regulatory or similar?
Well, regulatory, not so much, because the internet, you have to be according to some laws, the MCAs and so on. But in terms of mindset, yes. Having Portugal Ventures with us, it's very interesting to understand the Portuguese, how we are framed here in Portugal for hiring and so on. Having eVentures as a global VC perspective, it's very important to us because we are in this kind of global world. And then having Asian investors, Gobi from China and Singapore, help us our mindset, because sometimes we are addressing markets and we don't have the correct mindset. So talking over breakfast, we had the breakfast in Hong Kong last week, and discussing things is the most useful thing that we can get in the end, to get some support, to help us to get the right mindset. So very practically, how you guys, Jonathan, how you guys organize it now? I mean, I understand, for example, where you have the board meetings. Purely logistically, what is the overhead to have investors in 3 continents?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a challenge. I mean, if you want to have, a U.S. board member at the same time with a European office and Asia, it's impossible. So for 2 parties, it's always going to be really early, and for the other one, it's going to be really late at night. So I think there needs to be some kind of flexibility on every side. But I think it also helps to have people with different cultures and different thought levels on the table, to just give a different perspective and to also challenge the founding team, because sometimes it's hard if you're just in your local market and you don't have these perspectives. It's extremely helpful if you have these people around the table.
I just want to add, I think for Portuguese startup, I think so Portugal actually has been in Southeast Asia for a few hundred years. So I think for Portuguese startups, one of the interesting aspects is actually the talent that you have. So I think we didn't talk much about Tiago, the person that showed up in one of my office one day. He's actually Portuguese, but he went to school in Macau, right? So he's a very unique individual. So I think what is unique here is actually, although there's diversity, there's actually connections, right? So these are people, they are Portuguese, study in Macau, based in Singapore. So people that we can actually talk to constantly in Singapore. So they help with the process.
Fernando, would you say that Asia, or specifically China, is, specifically through this Macau connection, is the more natural markets to seek out, especially for B2C startups from Portugal, than, for example, Brazil or Angola or Mozambique?
I think that Southeast Asia, for mobile, I think that China is overcrowded with very big and established players. It's very difficult to make a play there. But Southeast Asia, you have huge countries, nonetheless, and they are very, very good opportunities. And we can, in fact, leverage our history there, because one thing that I think was instrumental in getting Asian investors on board was that Aptoid's bid or ask was not, give us money because we want to go to Asia. No, they had connections in Asia, they had customers in Asia, they had partners in Asia, and in fact they had started an office there, a physical presence there, and with someone with history there. So that makes it a lot more easier. I believe that in some cases, Brazil, because sometimes people think that just because we speak the same language, even though we went there, don't know anyone that lived there in the team, that it will work. And I think that this case proves the opposite precisely.
So you had established a presence before. How is the setup now? Like what does it look like in terms of how you organize? What part of the team is here? What physical presence you actually have in Asia, and where do you see this evolving in the future?
So we have 50 people in Lisbon, 3 in Shenzhen, south of China, and then 2 in Singapore. And it's really important to have local presence. I was last week in Shenzhen. We talked with the top manufacturers that are our partners, TV manufacturers that have Android TVs. And when they know that there is someone in the team that speaks Mandarin, and when they know that you are physically there, like 5 minutes by car from their office, they trust you much more. So if you want to bring on board investors from other parts of the world, could be Asia, could be US, if you want to bring partners, you also have to be committed. Could be putting someone on the team there, could be anything else.
Great. I think we're about running out of time, but we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Any takers? Any Portuguese companies here? Any founders actively trying to raise capital in Asia or expanding to Asia?
Hi. Aptoid has been doing great stuff in the mobile space. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future and how you see it develop. Can it be a worldwide company and disrupt more established players like Google apps and iOS apps, or do you see it more as being the king of Southeast Asia?
Good point. We are worldwide, so Southeast Asia is around, I would say, 20% of our markets. South America is even bigger than Southeast Asia for us. And what we see ourselves is a 1 billion devices company. We see in the next 3 years, 4 years, we can have our app store in 1 billion devices. And the reason is by design, we are different from Google Play and App Store. We are decentralized, we are an open platform. So having this vision in mind and with the help of the investors, we hope to reach that vision. And Android today, don't forget, it's not only smartphones or tablets, our Android TVs, our VR Oculus, our cars. So we aim to develop a platform, an open platform that can run an app store in any of these Android devices. And that's our goal, that's our vision for the Android and mobile space.
Any other questions? Oh, perfect timing, huh? Great. Oh, there was a question.
You traveled all the way from somewhere to be here. You get 5 minutes, no questions. It's not fair. So, well, a round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Up next, there should be an interview, but as we're running short on time, we are rescheduling the interview. So Gil Dibner and Daniela Araújo will be here tomorrow at 2:30 in the afternoon. Okay?